What if the person your whole family forbids you to love is the one truth was never meant to keep from you? A locked door, a stolen phone call in the rain, a marriage built on a secret nobody knew was a lie. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you will never look at family rules the same way again. His name was Daniel Carter, 24 years old, the kind of son every parent points to at family dinners and says, be more like him. A steady job, a quiet, comfortable house, a future that had already been written for him by people who loved him, but never once asked him what he wanted. Her name was Emily, warm-eyed, quick to laugh, the one person who could make Daniel forget every expectation the world had placed on his shoulders. They had grown up together, the same birthday parties, the same holiday tables, the same childhood summers spent chasing each other through their grandmother's backyard. Nobody expected that closeness to become something more, but it did, and that is where our story begins. At first, it was small things. A glance held a second too long across a crowded room, a laugh that came too easily, too often, only between the two of them. Daniel told himself it was nothing. Emily told herself the same thing. They had been raised to believe they were first cousins, and cousins do not fall in love. That was the rule. That was the wall neither of them was allowed to climb. But hearts rarely read the rule book. Slowly, without either of them choosing it, cousins stopped feeling like the right word for what they were to each other. A text message that used to say goodnight started saying, I miss you. A hand that used to help someone off a swing started to linger a second too long before letting go. They fought it. They told themselves it would pass, that it was just closeness, just comfort, just the safety of someone who had known you your whole life. It did not pass. By the time Daniel understood what he was feeling, it was already too late to talk himself out of it. He was in love with Emily, not the love of family, the love that keeps you awake at night, the love that makes every room feel empty when she isn't in it. And somewhere in her own silence, Emily was carrying the exact same secret. For a long time, neither of them said a word. What was there to say? Their families had built an entire world around the idea that Daniel and Emily were cousins. Nothing more, nothing less. To speak the truth out loud felt like setting fire to everything both families had ever believed about themselves. So they hid it. They sat 2 seats apart at dinners, careful never to sit beside each other, because sitting together felt too much like a confession. They avoided long conversations in front of relatives. They became experts at pretending, smiling through gatherings while carrying a secret heavy enough to break a person in half. But secrets like that do not stay quiet forever. One evening, after a family gathering had emptied out and only the two of them remained on the porch, Daniel finally said the words he had been swallowing for months. I don't think I can keep pretending anymore, Emily. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him. And in that silence, he saw that she had been waiting just as long to hear someone else say it first. Neither can I, she finally whispered. That night changed everything. There was no going back to pretending, no going back to careful distance and rehearsed smiles. From that point on, Daniel and Emily were no longer hiding a feeling. They were hiding a relationship. They tried, at first, to imagine a version of their future where their families simply came around, where enough time, enough patience, enough quiet devotion would soften the resistance they knew was coming. They told themselves that love this real could not possibly be refused forever. They were wrong. When Daniel finally sat his parents down and told them he wanted to marry Emily, the room went cold before he even finished the sentence. His father rose from the table so fast his chair scraped against the floor. Absolutely not. 3 words. That was all it took to end months of hope in a single breath. His mother did not yell. She didn't need to. The look on her face said everything his father's words had already made clear. This would never be allowed. Not now. Not ever. Emily's parents reacted no differently. When she told them the truth, there was no shouting either. Only something colder, a calm, deliberate warning. They told her that choosing Daniel would mean choosing to lose everyone else. They told her she would be cut off, financially and emotionally, disowned in every way that mattered. They told her, in the gentlest, cruelest voice a parent can use, that she would regret this for the rest of her life. She did not believe them, but she was terrified they might be right. What followed were the hardest weeks of both their lives. Their families, united for the first time in their shared disapproval, made sure Daniel and Emily could not simply wait it out together. Phones were taken. Visits were monitored. Every innocent trip to see a friend was quietly tracked. Every phone call questioned. It felt, to both of them, less like a family protecting its values and more like a prison built out of love turned into control. Daniel began to notice something he had never noticed before. How quickly people who claimed to love you could turn cold the moment you stopped fitting the picture they had drawn of your life. His father, once his loudest supporter, now barely looked at him. His mother's silence at dinner said more than any argument could. Emily felt the same isolation creeping into her own home. Her parents watched her like she might disappear at any moment, which, in their minds, was exactly the danger she posed to the family's reputation. Every conversation became an interrogation disguised as concern. Weeks passed like this. Two people who loved each other, separated not by distance, but by walls built out of tradition, fear, and the terrifying possibility of being wrong about rule they had never once questioned. And then, on a rainy Friday night, everything changed. Emily called Daniel from a phone she had borrowed from a friend, her voice trembling on the other end of the line. "I can't live like this anymore," she whispered. There was no need for Daniel to ask what she meant. He already understood. This wasn't a phone call about missing each other. It was a phone call about choosing a future. Right now, tonight, before either of them lost the courage to choose at all. "Then let's go," he said quietly. "Let's just go." There was a long pause on the line. Rain tapped against a window somewhere in the background. And then, softly, Emily said the words that would change both their lives forever. "Okay." The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Daniel and Emily slipped away from everything they had ever known. 2 small bags. A little money saved in secret. No plan beyond the next few hours. They did not say goodbye. Goodbyes would have meant giving their families a chance to stop them. And this time, they were not willing to be stopped. As the town disappeared behind them in the rearview mirror, neither of them spoke for a long time. There was fear in the silence. The fear of the unknown. The fear of everything they were leaving behind. But there was something else, too. Something neither of them had felt in months. Relief. For the first time in a long time, no one was watching them. No one was deciding for them. Whatever came next, however hard it would be theirs to face together. They drove for hours, further than either of them had ever traveled alone, until they reached a small town neither of their families had ever heard of. It was there, in a quiet courthouse with strangers as witnesses, that Daniel and Emily became husband and wife. No decorations, no family, no blessing from anyone who was supposed to love them. Just 2 people, choosing each other, in the plainest room imaginable. And as they stepped outside afterward, hand in hand, Emily looked up at Daniel with tears in her eyes and said the only thing that felt true in that moment: "We're free." But freedom, as they were about to learn, is never quite as simple as it feels on the day you win it. Because somewhere, far behind them, in a house neither of them had seen in weeks, an old woman was holding an envelope. One that contained a truth neither Daniel nor Emily could have ever imagined. A truth that would change everything they thought they knew about the sacrifice they had just made. They thought the hardest part was behind them. They thought that once they said, "I do," the fighting would stop and the fear would fade. They were wrong. Because the truth is, walking away from your family is not the ending of a story. It is only the beginning of a much harder one. If part 1 was about the courage it took to leave, part 2 is about the price they paid to stay. The first few weeks felt like a strange kind of dream. Daniel and Emily rented a small apartment on the edge of a town where nobody knew their names, nobody knew their history, and nobody looked at them like they had committed a crime simply by loving each other. For the first time in months, they could hold hands in public without checking over their shoulders. They could sit beside each other at a table without calculating who might be watching. It felt, for a little while, like everything they had sacrificed was finally worth it. But dreams, even good ones, cannot pay rent. Daniel had left behind a stable job, one his father had helped him get years earlier, one that came with connections and comfort neither of them realized how much they depended on. Emily had left behind her own plans, too, a college fund her parents controlled, A support system she never thought she would have to live without. In the town they now called home, none of that existed anymore. They were starting from nothing. The first blow came quickly. Daniel found work at a small warehouse, loading and unloading trucks for hours at a time, coming home each night with sore hands and a tired back. Emily took a job at a local diner, working double shifts just to help cover the bills. It wasn't the life either of them had imagined. It wasn't the life their families had planned for them, but it was theirs. And in the beginning, that was enough. Still, the weight of what they had left behind did not disappear just because they had chosen to run from it. At night, long after Emily had fallen asleep, Daniel would lie awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment his father stood up from the dinner table. Absolutely not. 2 words that had once controlled the direction of his entire life. He wondered if his father missed him. He wondered if his mother cried when she thought no one was watching. He wondered if choosing love had also meant choosing to break the hearts of the people who raised him. Emily carried her own version of that same ache. She missed her mother's voice on the phone, even the worried, controlling version of it. She missed Sunday dinners, missed the noise of a full house, missed feeling like she belonged somewhere bigger than just the 2 of them. Love, she was learning, does not erase loneliness. Sometimes it simply changes its shape. There were nights when Emily cried quietly in the bathroom so Daniel wouldn't hear. There were mornings when Daniel stared at his phone, thumb hovering over his father's contact number, before setting it back down without calling. Neither of them said much about it out loud, but both of them were carrying the same silent question. Did we make a mistake? Money made everything harder. There were weeks when they had to choose between paying the electric bill and buying enough groceries to last until the next paycheck. There were nights when dinner was nothing more than plain rice and whatever vegetables were cheapest at the corner store. Daniel took on extra shifts whenever he could, coming home exhausted, sometimes too tired to even talk. Emily picked up shifts at the diner on days she was supposed to rest, her feet aching, her voice hoarse from a full day of smiling at strangers who had no idea what she had given up just to stand there. It would have been easy, in those moments, to blame each other, to let exhaustion turn into resentment, the way it does for so many young couples facing hardship for the first time. And there were nights when tempers flared, small arguments about bills, about chores, about whose turn it was to deal with the landlord's complaints. But every time the fighting started to feel dangerous, one of them would stop, take a breath, and remember exactly why they were fighting for this life in the first place. "We didn't choose easy," Daniel told her one night, after a particularly hard argument about money. "We chose real." Emily didn't answer right away. She simply reached across the small kitchen table and took his hand. "Then let's keep choosing it," she said. "Every single day if we have to." And somehow, that became their promise to each other. Not a promise that things would be easy, but a promise that no matter how hard things became, they would keep choosing each other again and again. Slowly, painfully, they began to build something of their own. They learned how to budget every dollar. They learned how to fix small things around the apartment instead of paying someone else to do it. They learned how to laugh again, even in hard moments. Daniel making jokes about the terrible coffee at his warehouse job. Emily doing impressions of the diner's grumpiest regular customers until they were both laughing so hard they forgot, just for a few minutes, how tired they really were. They started to build new traditions too, small ones, but there's Sunday mornings with cheap pancakes and old music playing from a second-hand radio. Friday night spent walking to the town's tiny park, talking about everything and nothing, holding hands under streetlights instead of hiding from them. It wasn't the life they had imagined as children. It wasn't the approval they had once hoped their families would eventually give. But it was real. It was earned. And every single day they stayed together despite the hardship. They proved something to themselves that no one else's opinion could ever take away. That their love was not a mistake born out of rebellion. It was a choice made again and again, even when it would have been easier to walk away. But even as they built this new life, the past refused to stay buried. One afternoon, months into their marriage, Emily ran into a distant family friend at the grocery store, someone who still had contact with her parents. The woman's face changed the moment she recognized Emily, a mixture of shock and pity that made Emily's stomach twist. "Your mother," the woman said carefully. She's not doing well, Emily. She misses you. She won't say it, but I can see it. Emily didn't know how to respond. Part of her wanted to ask 100 questions. How her mother looked, whether her father ever spoke about her, whether anyone had defended her choice, even quietly, even once. But the words caught in her throat, and all she could manage was a small nod before hurrying out of the store. That night, she told Daniel everything. "Do you think they'll ever forgive us?" she asked quietly. Daniel didn't have an easy answer. He wanted to believe that time would soften the wound, that eventually love would matter more to their families than tradition. But hope, after everything they'd been through, felt like a fragile thing to hold on to. "I don't know," he admitted. "But even if they never do, I don't regret choosing you." Emily rested her head against his shoulder, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. In that quiet, in that small apartment that had slowly become home, they both understood something important. That love built on sacrifice carries its own kind of strength, one that no family disapproval could fully take away. Then, on an ordinary evening that felt no different from any other, everything changed again. Emily returned home from her shift at the diner to find an envelope waiting outside their apartment door. There was no return address, just her name, written in handwriting she recognized instantly, the careful, old-fashioned script of her grandmother. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. She had not heard from anyone in her family in months. Not a call, not a message, nothing. And now, out of nowhere, a letter from the one person in her family who had never once raised her voice against their marriage. "Daniel," she called out, her voice unsteady. "Come here. Now!" Daniel walked in from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a towel, and the moment he saw Emily's face, he knew something serious was happening. "What is it?" Emily held up the envelope, her fingers still shaking. "It's from my grandmother." They sat down together at the small kitchen table, the same table where they had shared hard conversations, quiet dinners, and countless promises to keep choosing each other no matter what. But this time, as Emily carefully opened the envelope, neither of them had any idea just how much the next few minutes were about to change everything they believed about the sacrifice they had made. Inside was a folded letter and something else, an old photograph, yellow with age, tucked carefully behind the pages. Emily unfolded the letter slowly, her eyes scanning the first line, and then she stopped breathing. "Daniel," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you need to read this." Whatever was written on that page was about to unravel everything they thought they knew about their families, about the rules they had broken, and about the sacrifice they believed they had made simply to be together. Because sometimes the truth a family hides for decades does not just change the future. It rewrites the entire past. Some letters carry news. Some letters carry apologies. And some letters carry the power to rewrite everything a person believed about their own life. This is a letter that did all three. Emily's hands trembled as she unfolded the pages further, the old photograph sliding out and landing softly on the kitchen table between them. Daniel reached for it first, turning it over gently. It was a picture of two young women standing in front of a small house, both of them smiling, both of them clearly sisters. But something about the way they stood, the slight distance between them, made it look less like a family photo and more like two strangers who had only recently met. "Read it," Daniel said quietly. "Read it out loud." Emily's voice shook as she began. "My dearest Emily, I should have told you this a long time ago. I told myself I was protecting the family by staying silent, but silence has only caused more pain than the truth ever could have. I am sorry. I am so sorry." She paused, swallowing hard, before continuing. "Years ago, before you or Daniel were even born, there was a mix-up in our family records, a clerical error made during a time when paperwork was often handled carelessly, especially in smaller towns. Two branches of our family were connected on paper in a way that was never actually true in blood. Your grandfather and Daniel's grandmother were not brother and sister, as everyone believed. They were raised together after a family tragedy, but they were never blood relatives. Only family by circumstance, not by birth." Emily stopped reading, her breath caught in her throat. "Daniel," she whispered, "that means..." Daniel had already understood. His mind was racing faster than his voice could keep up with. If Emily's grandfather and his own grandmother were never truly blood relatives, then the line the entire family had drawn between them, the line that cost them everything, had never actually existed at all. They were not first cousins. They were not even related by blood. The rule that shattered their families, forced them into hiding, stripped away their support systems, and pushed them into months of hardship, had been built on a mistake buried decades before either of them had even been born. Emily kept reading, her voice breaking with every line. I found the truth years ago, hidden in old paperwork I was never supposed to see. I was afraid of what it would mean for the family if the truth came out, afraid of the questions it would raise, afraid of upsetting people who had built their whole understanding of our family around a story that was never fully accurate. So I stayed quiet, and I have regretted that silence every single day since I watched you and Daniel be torn apart over a truth I could have given you from the very beginning. You did not run away from your family because you did something wrong. You ran away because we failed to give you the truth you deserved. I hope someday you can forgive me, and I hope, more than anything, that this letter finds you both together and finds you happy. With all my love, Grandma. Emily set the letter down, her hand still shaking, tears streaming freely down her face now. Daniel sat frozen for a moment, staring at the photograph, at the letter, at the woman across the table who had just become both his wife and, somehow, a stranger to the very story he thought defined their entire relationship. And then, slowly, something unexpected happened. Daniel started to laugh. Not out of joy exactly, not yet, but out of something deeper, something between disbelief and release. Months of hardship, of fear, of sleepless nights spent wondering if they had made the biggest mistake of their lives. All of it had been built on a secret that was never true to begin with. We left everyone behind, Emily said softly, her voice trembling between tears and laughter of her own, because they told us we couldn't be together, and it turns out we were never forbidden in the first place. Daniel finished for her. For a long moment, they simply sat there, holding each other's hands across the small kitchen table, letting the truth settle over them like a weight finally being lifted after months of carrying it in silence. But even as relief washed over them, something else rose alongside it, a quieter, heavier feeling neither of them expected. Grief. Grief for the months of pain that never needed to happen. Grief for the family dinners they missed, the birthdays celebrated without them, the silence between them and the people who raised them, all of it built on a misunderstanding that could have been corrected years earlier with a single honest conversation. Daniel thought about his father standing up from the dinner table, the two words that had shattered his world. Absolutely not. Had his father known the truth? Or had he, too, been living his entire life believing a story that was never fully accurate? Emily thought about her mother's warnings, the threats of being disowned, the fear in her parents' voices when they spoke about her relationship with Daniel. Had they been protecting a tradition they didn't fully understand? Or had they simply been too afraid to question something the family had believed for generations? There were no easy answers. But for the first time in months, Daniel and Emily allowed themselves to feel something other than fear about the future. They allowed themselves to hope. The next few weeks were not simple. Truth, even good truth, takes time to settle into a family that has been broken for months. Emily wrote back to her grandmother first, her hand steadier this time, her heart lighter with every word. Slowly, carefully, word began to spread through both families about what the letter had revealed. Some relatives reacted with disbelief, unwilling to accept that a mistake decades old could have caused so much unnecessary pain. Others reacted with something closer to shame, realizing how quickly they had been willing to cut off two people they loved over a rule none of them had ever actually questioned. Daniel's father was the hardest to reach. Pride, once wounded, does not heal quickly. But one evening, months after the letter arrived, Daniel's phone rang with a number he hadn't seen in what felt like forever. He almost didn't answer, but he did. Daniel, his father said, his voice rougher than Daniel remembered, heavier with things unspoken. I heard about the letter. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything neither of them had said in months. I was wrong, his father finally admitted. Not about loving you. Never about that. But wrong about how I handled it. I let fear make a decision that should have belonged to you. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling months of tension finally begin to loosen in his chest. I know, Dad, he said quietly. I know. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Some wounds don't close overnight, and some trust takes years to rebuild fully. But it was a beginning, a door that had been slammed shut months earlier, slowly, carefully, being opened again. Emily's reunion with her parents came slower, filled with more difficult conversations, more tears, more moments where old hurt resurfaced before healing could truly begin. But it came, piece by piece, conversation by conversation. The family that had once threatened to disown her began, cautiously, to welcome her back. Not the same as before, but perhaps something even stronger, built now on honesty instead of unquestioned tradition. Looking back, Daniel and Emily often talked about what they had learned from those difficult months apart from their families. It would have been easy to feel only anger at the mistake, anger at the silence that let it continue for so long, anger at everything they had lost that could have been avoided. But instead, they chose something different. They chose to see the experience not as a wound, but as proof of something they might never have discovered otherwise, the true strength of their love. Because long before they knew the truth about their families, long before any letter arrived to change everything, they had already chosen each other fully, completely, without needing permission from anyone. They had built a life out of nothing. They had learned to survive hardship together, to support each other through fear and uncertainty, to keep choosing love even when the whole world seemed to be standing against it. The truth about their family history didn't create their love. It only confirmed what they already knew deep inside, that what they felt for each other was real, strong enough to survive being tested in the hardest way possible. There's a simple truth in Daniel and Emily's story, one that reaches far beyond their own lives. Sometimes, the things we are told are unchangeable rules are simply inherited fears, passed down through generations without anyone stopping to question whether they are even true. Sometimes, the walls we are told we cannot climb are not walls at all, just shadows of old mistakes, old silences, old fears that were never properly examined. And sometimes the courage it takes to choose love, even when the world tells you not to, becomes the very thing that leads you to a truth strong enough to heal an entire family. Daniel and Emily did not marry because they discovered they weren't truly cousins. They married because they loved each other enough to risk everything for that love. Their comfort, their families, their entire understanding of the life they were supposed to live. The truth that arrived later did not create their happiness. It simply gave them permission to finally stop apologizing for choosing it. Today, when people ask Daniel and Emily about those difficult months, the ones filled with hardship, fear, and uncertainty, they don't describe it as the darkest chapter of their story. They describe it as a chapter that taught them who they really were. Because sometimes, it is only when everything familiar is stripped away that two people discover the true depth of what they are willing to build together. Sometimes, the hardest sacrifices reveal the strongest kind of love. Not the kind that needs approval to survive, but the kind that survives long enough to earn it. If this story moved you, touched something quiet inside your own heart, or reminded you that love, real love, is always worth fighting for, don't let it end here. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay for the next story, because there are so many more journeys like Daniel and Emily's still waiting to be told. Sometimes, the truth doesn't destroy what we built. Sometimes, it simply reminds us why we built it in the first place. The end.